Wonderful. Thank you, Bill, and thank you to the members of ASQ Columbus for having me speak today. My name is Natalie Weber. I'm currently working as a quality engineer at MasterControl. MasterControl is a QMS, software as a service, SaaS company based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. I am a microbiologist by training, and I've worked in the life sciences industry for the last 10 years. 2.5 of those years have been with MasterControl. In my role at MasterControl, I host customer audits. I also host our ISO certification audits. I also work on internal auditing and auditing our suppliers. At MasterControl, even before 2020, we've hosted numerous remote audits for our international customers. And then since March of 2020, we've hosted probably 10 to 15 remote audits for our customers up until this point. And then finally, I am a proud member of the ASQ. I got my CQA certification last year. So some key takeaways for today. We're going to talk about achieving the same goals while doing a remote audit. Digitizing records will be a huge benefit for achieving these goals. And then we'll also examine regulators' guidance on remote audits. So obviously things have changed and we're all adjusting to a new work environment. And we're going to talk about auditing in a pandemic. So the first obvious change is travel. Traveling to sites may no longer be possible due to your company or the auditee's company policies, or even out of concern for your own personal health. So your options are then a desk audit or a remote audit. If you're choosing a remote audit, it's essential to collaborate on a plan. So there's some new things to plan for, and I suggest engaging the auditee as early as possible so that both sides can collaborate on this plan and feel comfortable. So typically things to address early on in the process are, which technology platform are you going to use? Does your IT department mandate you're only allowed to use Zoom or Microsoft Teams? Does that jive with the auditee's IT protocols? Can you find common ground and decide on a platform that both sides feel comfortable with? Some other things to consider: have you provided a list of attendees from both sides so that the audit host knows a legitimate attendee versus an intruder into your meeting? And then finally, how will records be shared? Are you going to share your screen? Are you able to set up a secure file transfer before the audit, during the audit? And then how long after the audit are you able to securely share those files? So now more than ever, it's essential to keep cybersecurity in the forefront of our minds. We're using these digital platforms and relying on digital communication paths. So I would suggest talking with your internal IT departments and make sure you understand all of the protocols that need to be followed. Some other new points to consider: AV setup. So while we were preparing for this presentation, we found out my microphone settings didn't work, and we took a lot of time. Thank you to the team for being patient with me trying to figure that out while I worked from home. So testing out microphone, testing out call-in numbers. We also looked at webcam. So for example, if everyone in the audit meeting has their webcam on, does it tax your bandwidth? Does it slow down file sharing? Could you have people use their webcam only to introduce themselves and then everybody turns them off for the remainder of the audit? Another fun thing that some people might have noticed is if you type and use your computer audio, does it sound like horses galloping? So just be aware that you might need to put yourself on mute or get an external microphone or use your phone if you're going to need to type while you host or attend an audit. Other things to consider: I found it's ideal to have 2 screens. So on one screen, I'm able to share a document, and then on the main screen, I'm able to see if any of the SMEs I've invited to the audit have any questions or concerns. Technology is not error-proof, unfortunately. So technology errors can start the audit off on the wrong foot. The goal of any audit is to make people feel comfortable and to stay neutral. So just being patient and understand we're all navigating new technology on top of the stress that already comes with hosting or attending an audit. So sometimes this can push people over the edge. So just be aware of that and stay patient. I suggest letting your IT team know if you're hosting or attending an audit, and then have them on standby just to help you troubleshoot quickly. Other things to consider: nobody wants to be on a call for 10 hours or can probably devote an entire week to an audit. So how much can you prepare and review ahead of time? Typically, a lot of information can be found on the auditee's website. And during your preparation and collaboration, it's good to talk about if there's a direct web address, if the auditor needs a login to get to this information, how long is that login good for? Can it be shared with other members of the audit team? And then finally, time zones. So now that the majority of people are working from home, and we're still a global industry, working with time zones is going to be key. So what's the difference between time zones for the sites? Are people in just 2 locations, or do you need to factor in several locations? Whose business hours do you plan for? And then are SMEs only available during a certain time period? And then how do you coordinate SMEs being able to talk to each other at the same time? So these are all new points to consider and think about, but many things have stayed the same. So a detailed audit agenda is critical, just like on-site audits. This allows an auditee to coordinate SME meetings, pull records, get things ready so that the audit runs smoothly, stays on a time schedule, and the auditors are still able to achieve their objectives. So communicating, collaborating, I'm going to say this over and over again, is going to be key. It's going to set both sides up for success. If you don't understand something on an agenda, don't assume, ask questions, maybe give examples of what you interpret it to mean, especially coming from a software company to the life sciences industry. We call things, use different terms for IT and some other things. So this has been key for me to make sure that we're on the same page with the auditor before we even start the audit. Most organizations have a standard process for hosting and performing audits, and this should be the same for remote audits. Things like following a checklist when you're performing an audit, and then when you're hosting, what's considered confidential and proprietary, what are you not allowed to share? And then how you present records will still hold true. You're just looking at a screen rather than looking at a person across the table. And then finally, if you don't feel comfortable presenting something, ask a colleague to help you with a mock audit. Kind of practice like you play mentality. So now I'll share some insights my team and I have gained from hosting digital audits ourselves. Having digital documents available at a moment's notice is going to be key. This allows the auditee to pivot if additional documentation is requested. Basically, if one topic leads to another that you weren't planning for. It also allows for SMEs to easily review documentation that's going to be presented. That way they are familiar with what's being presented and they're able to answer questions quickly and efficiently. Luckily at MasterControl, we use our own product as a digital QMS. It holds all of our procedures, our technical documents, our validation documents, training records, and supplier information. If this isn't an option, the other way you could do this is scanning and saving paper files. I would just suggest you scan and save them to a secure location that both you and the SMEs can have access to, especially if you're working from home. So for example, we have to use a VPN to log into our network files while we're working from home. So just making sure that that's all functioning and ready to go for audit day. Last thing is presenting documents. So typically I share my screen like we talked about before. And then I've found with Cisco WebEx, that's the platform we usually use, you can give people in the audit mouse control. So you can give the auditor control of your mouse. Obviously you're watching them click through things, but they'll be able to scroll through a procedure on the screen at their own pace, which is great. It saves them from saying next page or page down 40 times. So earlier we talked about what can be audited ahead of time. At MasterControl, we created a customer audit page with the most frequently requested documents on it. And then we also mirrored this off of what we ask our own suppliers. So our audit page includes a master procedure list. This is a list of all of our SOPs, work instructions, and policies. We also post our quality manual, which includes our quality policy in the same document. We post our document management procedure. This includes our record retention policy. We post the training procedure. This explains how often training is sent out, what's expected of employees when they do training. Our physical and digital security procedures are also posted. So we have badge access at all doors, what to do if a badge is lost, how to revoke someone's badge when they're leaving the company, those sorts of things. And then digital security is quite long for us, being a software company. So basically how we protect against hackers, malware, what to do if you think you've been hacked, those sorts of things. We also post our supplier management procedure, how we qualify and audit our suppliers, our incident management, CAPA deviation, how we handle non-conformances, how we handle any issues that come up. We also post a high-level organizational chart, and this is basically the organizational chart with actual names removed from it for data privacy reasons. But that way people are able to see how the quality team reports up to the CEO, or how we've laid out our support teams, those sorts of things. MasterControl itself is not regulated. We don't manufacture anything. We just provide a software tool. But we do hold 3 ISO certifications. So we post those certifications to this website so that our customers are able to see they're up to date. And then the last thing I would suggest is any key processes for your business model. So being a SaaS company, we post our backup and restoration procedures, our disaster recovery procedures for cloud systems, our software development lifecycle, and then our software validation documentation. In some cases, customers have gone to this website and this checked all the boxes for their assessment and they didn't even need to schedule a remote audit. And then in other cases, we've heard that this has made audit day much more successful because customers are able to come to the audit meeting with educated questions. So by far, the biggest hurdle for a remote audit is going to be a site walk or viewing a manufacturing line. There's no way around that. But this is where creativity and flexibility comes in. Can you have the auditee take the auditor on a virtual tour using a mobile device or an iPad? Is it possible for the auditee to use security camera footage or record the manufacturing line or the specific process that the auditor is interested in ahead of time, and then you can present that during the audit? In some cases, site walks could be postponed based on risk. In our industry, Justification is always based on risk. So some things to consider when justifying. When was the last time the process was audited? Have there been any changes to the process, to suppliers, to the facility? That information can always be provided by the auditee. Have there been any issues with this process in terms of product quality or quality events? Are the same people still doing the process? Has a whole new group of 10 people been assigned to this line since the last time you performed the audit on site? And then finally, have they changed anything with how they train and certify people to perform this process? In some cases, a site tour may not be required if you can show procedures are being followed through documentation and trends. So is it reasonable and logical that someone wouldn't be able to do X step if the proper process or the previous step wasn't followed? So using documentation and records to piece together the process and make sure procedures are being followed is another option. Trends will also show if product quality or operator quality are being maintained over time. Is it within the specified quality limits still? Have they had a breach of these quality limits? If they did, what did they do to mitigate risk and correct the issue? Was a CAPA launched? That kind of leads to other documentation that you can look at. And then SMEs talking through their processes is going to be key. They know it better than anybody, and they can help auditors understand what the documentation and the trending is showing them. So throughout all of this, it's key to keep to a schedule. Even though auditors don't have a plane to catch, timelines and mutually agreed upon agendas need to be respected. An unexpected topic can sometimes require an SME that wasn't previously scheduled. So the audit team needs to work on scheduling that meeting on top of the objectives that they're already trying to achieve from the agenda. So no one I know can afford to be on a call hours or days longer than they expected and still get their regular job done. Especially in this new work environment, we're all doing more with less, and some people are now wearing multiple hats. So extending kindness and respect by sticking to a schedule is going to go a long way. What are auditors looking for? It's the same question. Are you upholding quality to the same level year over year, audit over audit? And some of the topics I've noticed that are now coming to the forefront of audits because of the pandemic include business continuity. So did you successfully execute your business continuity plans? Did you have a pandemic and moving your entire workforce to a work from home model as part of that business continuity planning? Did you find any gaps in your business continuity plan? And then did you update your risk assessments based on that? Did you need to find an alternative supplier because global supply chains and shipping were interrupted? Did you follow your procedures for that? Speaking of moving the entire workforce to a work from home model, that's what MasterControl did. We had a skeleton staff stay from March, but most of us are still working from home. So now that people are working from home, is digital security and confidentiality being upheld? How can you monitor that? Did you add training to address this? Sometimes people just need to be reminded not to click on things from emails or enter their credentials into something they don't find familiar. Also, did you remind your people of the need for data integrity and cybersecurity now more than ever? Especially for those companies that are working on a vaccine for COVID-19 or any therapeutics related to that. Those people basically have a target on them, so confidentiality and data security are going to be key. So now that I've shared some of my experiences, In insights, let's talk about how regulators themselves are handling remote audits. So the FDA has scaled back foreign and domestic facility inspections. FDA is requesting importers send records required under FSVP rule electronically rather than going to the places of business. The agency is planning to continue conducting these types of audits that were previously assigned, and they're going to do them in a remote capacity. Another area that FDA is adapting is MDSAP audits. So facilities with a good record of conformity are allowed to have their surveillance or recertification audits done remotely. Recertifications performed via remote audit will result in a certification that's only valid for 12 months. And they want to do this to make sure that they schedule a subsequent on-site audit as soon as possible. On their website, the agency also explains what can and cannot be in the scope of a remote MDSAP audit. So for example, adding a new facility to the scope cannot be performed remotely. Prior to undertaking a remote audit, the administrative officer has been instructed to verify the facility is capable of hosting a remote audit in terms of technology. So this is where being comfortable with your technology platform is key. The agency has also instructed the administrative officers, to note any technological difficulties encountered during the remote audit that led to delays or difficult communication. So again, make sure you've kind of got all your bugs worked out before you host an FDA audit, because they will be reporting on that if there's any delays or difficult communication experienced. They also state surveillance audits will focus on activities that can be verified remotely. Mandatory elements that cannot be verified during a remote audit will be listed as deviations and then added to the next on-site audit. So for example, if a site walk or viewing the manufacturing line can't be achieved, they'll write that down as a deviation, and then that'll be added to the scope of the next on-site audit. This checklist, the FDA posted in August, I believe. They worked with OSHA on this. This could be super helpful. It's basically for industry to use when assessing operations during this time, especially when restarting operations after a shutdown or when assessing operations because of changes. And all of this information is available on FDA's website. And we'll also send a link to the specific page that I found most of this information. So we've talked about FDA, let's also talk about European Medicines Agency. So they've stated that GCP inspections can be conducted remotely, and this is determined on a case-by-case basis. They state that remote inspections should follow the applicable procedures already in place for GCP inspections, while considering the limitations of a remote process and recognizing that a remote process cannot completely replace an on-site GCP inspection. So again, acknowledging it's not apples to apples, but this is the best we can do for right now. The EMA states a feasibility assessment should be performed. They provide a lot of guidance about this. So there's a lot of work up front, like we talked about before. Planning, communication, collaborating is going to be key. So they want to assess whether the inspectee is able to provide remote access to electronic systems and maintain communication with the inspectors. So are you able to present documents and then also have like a video conferencing system or a chat feature going at the same time? They acknowledge technical nuances of systems, as well as the IT policies for both sides need to be considered. Usually there's restrictions on software and file sharing protocols imposed by IT departments, regulatory agencies, so those need to be considered. They also specifically call out the inspectee should ensure remote technical support is available to the inspectors. This is basically if you run into any issues with computerized systems, such as the eTMF or the eCRF, so electronic versions of those documents, those files. And then basically, if you make it through the feasibility assessment, they'll move forward with conducting the audit. So now we're in preparation phase. This is where they say communication pathways and direct access to computerized systems should be tested prior to starting the audit. The inspectors should have read-only access to crucial electronic systems, especially the eTMF and the eCRF. They specifically state that the eTMF should be robust and capable of supporting a remote inspection, even if the eTMF is decentralized, managed from different locations, or its contents are spread across different systems. So some things to keep in mind, how those systems work together. The EMA specifically calls out new challenges that come with remote audits. So they state that it may take longer. And so mutually agreed upon timelines need to be discussed ahead of time and factored in. Once all of this preparation is complete, the opening meeting, the inspection, and the closing meeting in the EMA guidance basically mirror an on-site audit. And then again, we'll send the link to the web address where I found all of this information, and you can read it for yourselves. So as we discussed today, there are ways to achieve the same goals during a remote audit. It just takes some adjustment and some patience. Even regulators are adapting to this new work environment and performing remote audits. As we look ahead, remote audit practices may continue well beyond 2020 or even 2021. And my hope is that sharing insights with each other will help us all succeed in this. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Natalie. That was excellent information. I hope that all of our attendees today found that Natalie's presentation to be helpful and informative and benefit you as you maybe have to embark on a remote audit. Again, my name is Jennifer Hurst. I work at MasterControl with Natalie, and I will just be moderating the Q&A portion of our webinar today. So at the bottom of your screen, you have a Q&A button. Just enter any questions that you have in there, and then I will read them off to Natalie, and we'll get those answered. I do have a few questions to get us started. So Natalie, here you go. You said you've done a lot of remote audits. Have you ever gotten pushback from the other party when you told them it would be remote? And how did you handle that?
Yeah, great question. So I think the biggest hurdle with that we've seen is a site walk. So we talked about that today, how you can kind of get around that. But luckily, being a software company, I usually just explain that we just have cubicles and computers, and that's about it. We're not manufacturing anything. So it's not really that critical.
Okay. Do you think that there's any part of remote auditing that will continue even after we get through COVID-19 or we get the pandemic under control?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I could see companies like ours being a software company where you don't need to come on site to see processes, and you don't need to spend thousands of extra dollars to, fly out your IT SME or other SMEs with your audit lead auditor. If you're able to just get everybody to jump on a WebEx, I mean, that's going to save a lot of time and money for companies. Other things that I see lasting longer are posting a lot of information ahead of time on secure websites, or having an audit package that you securely send ahead of time that could save people a lot of time, or they don't even need to perform an audit after they've reviewed that information. It checks all the boxes of their assessment, those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just kind of like laying getting a lot of the groundwork out of the way.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So that
Yep.
when you do get back to having a site visit, the actual site portion of the visit is really focused on that, those aspects.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, here's a question. Does it take longer or shorter to perform a remote audit versus a site audit?
I think it just depends on what you're needing to accomplish. So if you've had issues with product, I mean, you're going to zero in on a manufacturing line, and is it a for-cause audit or not? For us, for example, we have actually shortened it. So on-site audits used to be a full day, 8 hours. We'd have lunch and then have plenty of time for people to review documents on site and meet with people. But because we've posted a lot more information on that customer audit page that I talked about, we've actually cut it down to 4 hours, which is incredible because we as a department are wearing more hats now that the pandemic has hit. So it just helps me a lot hosting audits to have another 4 hours of my day rather than an entire day dedicated to an audit. So we went from 8 hours on site to 4 hours remote.
Good. One attendee asked if you would be willing to share your email address if anyone had follow-on questions. So
Sure.
if you're willing to do that, okay, great. Then we'll go ahead and put that in the chat towards the end of this. Okay, so we've answered that question. All right. How about how do you handle virtual qualification audit to a new facility? If there is a business need, but auditee facility does not allow visitors in a COVID-19 time.
Oh, I see. So I would just follow, what FDA said, that they're not allowing new facilities to come into scope. So you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. If you need a secondary supplier, if this is the only supplier of that product that you need to use, maybe you could look at some of their past regulatory audits, because those would be on site, those would be doing a site walk. I don't think you could ask for other customers' audits. That would probably be proprietary, but maybe they could tell you if they had a successful FDA audit that included a site walk. And then you could kind of piece together, okay, when was that done? What's changed between that and now? Has anything changed with the product or the process that we're actually going to be using? And then you can kind of justify from there if it's absolutely necessary to bring on a new facility at this time. Otherwise, like FDA is saying on their website, it's going to require a on-site audit. So it's kind of a rock and a hard place. So sorry you're in that position if that's what you're dealing with.
Okay, thanks. Next question. How are records reviewed during the audit? Most of the time, records are hard copies. Do we need to scan and submit them? Or how does the auditor retain the document to issue the report?
It's a great question. You're probably going to have to scan it. That's kind of the simplest thing, is turning your paper records into electronic records. That way, you can easily send them if the auditor requests a copy, if you're able to give it to them. Other ways you could do it, I've seen teachers, for example, who don't have those awesome projectors anymore, where they do like a math problem and then it projects on a screen. So you could maybe try and set up, jerry-rig something with your webcam so that you can show like a paper record on your screen. And then maybe you scan and send that to the auditor afterwards. These are just some of my ideas off the top of my head.
Okay. Next question. Do you anticipate that this will will require that all audits be announced in the future if conducted virtually? Or do you expect that somehow we can transition to a surprise audit as conducted in the past?
That's a great question.
Yeah, do you think that there will be a surprise virtual or remote?
So what I've read from FDA's guidance and from EMA especially, there's like a whole checklist you've got to go through to make sure it's even feasible. And so checking those boxes, I mean, you'd have to engage the site early and you'd have to be able to have collaboration. So for right now, I don't see how they could do a surprise inspection, but there is a possibility that after they've known that company X has solid systems, we did a remote audit with them on this date, there could be a possibility, you know, of sending an email and saying, on Monday, we're going to start a remote audit. Please send us the link, and this is our agenda. So I think it's just kind of establishing everybody's baseline and then kind of moving from there.
Good. In some of the audits that you've been in or other information you may have, do the auditors typically perform interviews of the operators?
So for us, we don't have operators. And then working in life sciences industry, we usually had the manager over the process meet with the auditor. Very rarely did they actually pull an operator to talk about something specific. So the only thing I could think of is if there was a discrepancy with a record, or this operator wasn't trained correctly or didn't sign off their training, and the manager, whoever's talking to the auditor, couldn't answer directly, or, you know, didn't know, that's when you'd get the operator involved. But I've seen in life sciences industry, you usually have like a war room. And so that's where you prep all your SMEs, make sure they know how the audit's going, what they're going to be presenting and talking about. So you could have that conversation offline, just pause the WebEx, or have them move on to another topic and then take the conversation to another means of communication. You could set up another WebEx on the side to have those people talk to each other and then do it that way. Other things to consider, you could always prep the operator, just quick crash course in answering audit questions, only answer what you're asked. Know which record you're going to be presenting and talking about, make sure you're familiar and understand what happened, and then tell the truth, basically answer what you're asked, and then they should be able to just join the WebEx like normal and participate.
Excellent, thank you. Here's another one. It's kind of a situational type question. I work in a manufacturing environment with an upcoming ISO 9001:2015 surveillance third-party registrar audit in early December. While I haven't reached out to our registrar, do you know how audits of these types are being handled currently, i.e. are they remote or on-site? And then the attendee says, the difficulty with our facility is that cameras are not allowed inside the manufacturing facility, due both to security and safety.
Yeah, that's another great point, is can you actually videotape something? So funny enough, in less than a month, I'll be hosting our ISO 9001 audit, and we're doing everything remote. So our auditor is actually located in the UK. And so he is kind enough to adjust to our working hours. He's already sent the web link. We're using Microsoft Teams, which I am not familiar with, so I'm getting ready for that. But for us, again, having everything digital, I feel prepared. He sent us an agenda and I've just kind of cross-checked that, yeah, everything's in the system and up to date, and that's what we'll be doing. So for your QMS, it should probably just be a bunch of documentation, because it's how you handle issues, making sure everybody's aware of the quality manual, those sorts of things. So I would just prep your SMEs and your interview people, maybe schedule a couple mock audits to make sure everybody's comfortable with the technology platform that you'll be using, and then kind of go from there. And it's in December, so 2 months. Yeah, you should probably be hearing from them of this is the agenda, this is the platform that we'll be using. Usually they dictate that because they might have more strict IT policies. And then maybe what you could do in terms of showing them like a manufacturing process, and this might sound a little weird, but maybe if it's a medical device or something, you take like a pen and you kind of show them, maybe record this or take pictures of like an inanimate object that represents your device or your proprietary stuff, and just kind of show them with pictures and video or diagrams, like this is how we're doing things, and maybe see if that flies for them. Just a thought there.
Okay. What would you say is the most challenging thing during an audit process?
Staying neutral. So without fail, at the beginning of every remote audit I've hosted, somebody's audio doesn't work. And so just calming down, telling them it's no problem, like I can get my IT people, we can help you, and then making small talk with the other people that are on the call. I would not start the audit without having everybody present, because then that's like putting salt in the wound of you couldn't get your audio to work and we started without you, sorry. So basically just making sure everybody stays calm and you know, has a good experience. We're all humans, we're all trying to make this work, so being patient with each other is going to be huge. I think that's the biggest thing. I already kind of talked about requests for site walks and how we handle that. That's probably be the other major thing.
Okay, and then can you explain a little bit more about the difference between audit and qualification control?
That I am not an expert in because we don't manufacture things, but just kind of thinking off the top of my head. So we host customer audits of us as their supplier, their critical supplier. And then also, you know, qualifications to get your ISO certifications or MDSAP certification. That kind of is the difference, I think. But I can follow up and we can maybe send some of that information. I'm sorry, I don't know that one off the top of my head.
Okay. I will send the attendee your email address.
Perfect.
And then they can follow up. And then there's one more question. For companies that still mostly work with paper, do you have any advice on how to make remote audits easier?
Scanning them. It's going to be a hard process, a long process, but if you can kind of just chip away at you know, chunks at a time, maybe look at these are the most frequently requested records, so let's scan those first and get those saved into a secure location, and then just kind of chip away as you keep going. But really, honestly, scanning a file that you've already, you know, documented data on, that's kind of the only way you can go.
Okay, well, we don't have any other questions that have come in. I'm typing your email address into the chat function right now. There we go. So oh, I might have only sent it to panelists. Oh no, to panelists and attendees. So all panelists and attendees should have Natalie's email. It's nweber@mastercontrol.com. And I don't think Bill said I could just go ahead and close out the meeting. So we would just like to really, again, thank ASQ Columbus for inviting us to present today. We love doing these kind of meetings and supporting all of the local ASQ chapters. We know that the work that you're doing out there is helping to improve lives all over the place and ensure that quality is always top of mind. So again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.